Next story. The relationship between China and Latin America. And really other developing countries. Countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have a hard time securing international financing because of poor governance, corruption, and their economic policies. But China goes to them, builds desperately needed roads, railways, ports, and uses these facilities to transport raw material to feed its growing economy and population. China is an attractive investor not only because it has a policy of non-interference in the domestic affairs of its partner countries, but because its projects are completed at a speed that developing nations are unused to. More importantly, perhaps it offers to finance these projects on easy terms, but in reality, this often involves trading short-term gains for long-term dependency. So there was an article that came out about China and its relationship with several of these developing nations. You guys read the article. What do you guys think about it?
I mean, at the simplest analysis, it comes down to money, right, and resources. China needs resources because they have 1.5 billion people, and China itself is not sitting on a lot of resources for all those people. So, and these other countries need money, and they've needed money for the longest. And they've dealt with the West since like the end of since like the 60s and 50s, when colonialism ended, as far as like African countries. But, you know, the West has been giving them crumbs off their tables, and at the same time trying to dictate how they should conduct their affairs. You know, the U.S. has backed a lot of dictators. You know, when you think about like what happened in Chile, in Nicaragua. Where's Patrice Lumumba from? Is he?
I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, so they've been hypocritical in that, and they're not even really giving them the money that they need to build infrastructure. And you have to build infrastructure in order to attract other businesses, right? Like you need good roads, you need good railway, you need good ports to lower the cost of doing business in your country. And I think that's what China is offering, right, in return for their resources. And some of these countries don't have a choice because, I mean, there's only like, 4 ways a country can raise money. One is bonds, you know, raising taxes, going to the IMF and World Bank. Those haven't worked or can't work because these countries are poor, you know, by definition. So, I mean, here comes China with money. The only thing I would caution is that these countries have to do business with China in a smart way. And they should actually follow China's model in the way that they treat other foreign businesses, other foreign countries, in demanding the transfer of skills, demanding joint ventures with Chinese firms, and demanding that the local workers, where possible, get preferential treatment, you know, for hiring. Like China, don't bring all your workers to you know, the host country, and then they end up getting into retail businesses, competing with the locals. So I think, you know, it can work. Definitely, it could be a mutually beneficial relationship. It just, you know, depends on how these countries, their leadership, how they deal with China.
Yeah. You know, looking into this, it was definitely one of those, oh, wow, you know, seems like China's on a goodwill mission, right? They're coming in and investing in the developing and emerging countries and, you know, being able to invest in their infrastructure. But then you start to dig a little bit and you're like, okay, here's where the shit hits the fan. And it's, as you were mentioning, you know, Rob, is that, you know, a lot of these countries become desperate. You know, as you mentioned, the U.S. especially.
I'm broke.
Exactly. All I kept thinking about was that like last season when we talked about the you know, the dispensaries opening up in Oakland, and you said, how the hood gonna eat? And I'm like, yeah. What do you expect these countries to do? They gotta eat. So the U.S. being upset that, you know, foreign investment is coming directly from China and that they're basically buying their way into the, you know, the Western Hemisphere and even in parts of Europe. hey, what do you want? What do you expect them to do? Wait for you all the time? I mean,
sounds like jealousy to me.
Yeah, I was really like, they hating. No doubt. Real talk. I was like, it sounds like jealousy, man. You're just mad because basically, hey, you couldn't do it. Now you're getting mad at the Latin American countries and, countries in Africa that you won't invest. You're not looking out for them. And China's like, fuck it. Hey, we got a way for y'all to improve your infrastructure, to be able to prop up your economies. And hey, by the way, some of the terms are very friendly, where they do allow the countries to pay back on their terms and, really work with the countries to really be able to, make the loans that they're giving them and the investments affordable. The concern is like we just talked about, though, right? They have to make sure the countries, when they negotiate with China, that the terms are favorable, that they don't become dependent, and that China turns into a World Bank or IMF. And that's sometimes the shortfalls, when people say, well, how come China won't, Latin America and other countries, like other third world nations or developing nations, they go to the IMF and the World Bank. And for those that may not know, the World Bank and IMF is pretty much propped up, and U.S. driven banks that basically loan money to third world nations for the same type of things that China is loaning them money for: infrastructure, building up the economies, funding banks and providing currency support and things of that nature. But unfortunately, the IMF and World Banks, they end up becoming almost like a check cashing place, check cashing store where the terms are unfavorable. The countries become dependent on them, depending on the IMF and World Bank, almost in debt to them, where they become to a point almost like, it's like
somebody's daddy.
A daddy. Yeah, they become someone's daddy.
Yeah, it's very paternalistic.
Very. So, but again, hey, they got to do what they got to do, man. And especially the countries like Venezuela, where they're having, the whole crisis there, man. They got to do what they got to do. And if China's coming in with that cash, Wu-Tang said it best: cash rules everything around me, right? So,
dollar bill, yo.
Dollar bill, no doubt.
So a couple things about this. I think it's good that these developing nations are partnering with China. The developing nation, China doesn't really have like a history of like overthrowing government elected officials and installing their own dictatorship in order to prop up their own interests. I mean, countries in the West, they have, especially the U.S., they have a history of doing this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think that the trust level is a little higher when it comes to China because they don't have that those decades and decades and decades of imperialism built in, and that they're not so jaded when it comes to dealing with Western powers.
And by the way, they've also been victims of colonialism.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's right. But also another thing is that I think when it comes to these developing nations, you have to. It's difficult because there's a lot of corruption in a lot of these developing nations. So a lot of the you'll see like for example in Venezuela and in a lot of countries you'll see China or whatever nation them doing deals with the leaders or high-ranking officials in these countries that'll benefit those officials, but that'll be detrimental to the country itself. So that's the kind of thing that I think you need to be careful of when dealing with China or really with any country, in that you have these countries that are so incredibly corrupt that they can have these deals with no oversight or anything, that you can benefit like a handful of people, and you're in crony capitalism, and there you go. You're giving away your resources, but only like a handful of people are benefiting from this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And short-term deals where these handful of people, they get the short-term benefits, but the country suffers long-term.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that's the kind of thing that you have to be careful of when it comes to dealing with China or any country. If you're gonna have deals like this, you have to have sort of oversight over these deals, checks and balances. But unfortunately, with a lot of these countries, you don't really see that. You don't really have that.
Yeah, they take the money and run, right? And because they're so desperate.
Yeah.
But also, Yeah, but also, as we talked about the U.S. and some of the Western countries being, basically having their say in it and against a lot of the foreign investment being done by China, it made me laugh because as I read it and as I did some research on it, I'm like, yo, are you kidding me? The U.S., where you think half the real estate market comes from? Hello?
Yeah.
You look
It's crazy
around,
because like we have how much money have we borrowed from China?
they own the country. Quiet as kept. They own our T-bills. Tomorrow if they called from T-bills and say, yo, we want our money back, that's when Trump launch a missile on the motherfucker.
The finger wagging and the sanctimony is like, come on, guys.
But it's also funny because I mean they make it out to like seem like China is some sort of evil empire that's using these developing countries when the U.S. is the one who historically has been doing this kind of thing.
Exactly.
And
so
the thing about it with China, what I appreciate about China is that even with the corruption, China builds shit that people can see, right? So whether it's roads, so they don't just give money to these politicians. The politicians scheme off and put that money in Swiss accounts, like they in Africa. They were notorious for doing that during the 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
because they would just get checks from the World Bank and IMF. The United States won't care because they really didn't care about the people. All they cared about is containing the Soviets, right, and making sure that whatever countries that they supported and dictators, that they remained allied with the U.S. and promoted some form of capitalism and didn't allow communists to rise in their country. But China actually builds shit. Like a lot of these countries where you go, you'll see there are the roads that are being built and the railroads, the ports that are being improved. So these countries just have to be smart and they have to demand that their leaders be selfless, and sometimes that's hard to ask in the countries that are used to corruption.
So Rob, I have a question for you. So I've seen like a lot of people talk about like China in Africa, and they compare it to like U.S. colonialism or like Western colonialism, basically, the kid taking over the country, this kind of thing. But it isn't. Like just like in looking at it from outsider's point of view, it doesn't look like the same to me. I mean, with colonialism, I mean they were taking over the government, they implementing their own laws. So I mean the people didn't really have like control of their own country. But this seems like more of a partnership. So as far as like the people that in Kenya or elsewhere, what's like the temperature over there?
I talked to a few friends. They're wary about China and its influence, because you would be wary of any.
I was gonna say you have a right to be
people, right? And you should have a right to be based on the history. So I understand.
Exactly.
Don't trust them new niggas over there.
Right. So I understand the trepidation, but I need to talk to more people, man. But I have family members that go to Kenya all the time, and they say like it's a completely different country than it was like just even 8 years ago.
Wow.
Like the roads are much, they have like, multi-lane like highways just like the United States. They just built a railroad from like Nairobi to Mombasa. It takes 2 hours. So I mean, I hear a lot of good things, but I did hear some concerns when I talked to people about this subject. But I'm hoping to go in the next year, man, and check it out for myself.
Okay. All right. Okay. Bring back some rose petals. So let's move on to